Hello and welcome back to The Vegan Runner. Today we're taking a look back at my first ultra marathon training block. We're mid-taper, just days away from Race to the Stones 100k. We'll take a look at what's worked, what's gone well, and what I do differently next time. Let's go. So I'm pretty excited. The legs are starting to come back to life again, and the foundation runs and the easy runs, they've sort of transitioned from being a much needed rest to feeling like I'm having to hold myself back from pushing too hard and going too fast. The taper effect is kicking in and I'm almost feeling ready for race day on Saturday. So just a bit of background to this training block before I get into what has gone well and what I do differently next time. I train using the 80-20 method. Essentially, my training is 80% easy running and 20% hard. That's the principle behind the plan, and I've been using it for a couple of years now with pretty decent results. Higher mileage, faster half marathons and marathons, and it's built up my aerobic base ready to tackle this ultra marathon. For this block, I use the 80-20 50 mile to 100k training plan. All of the workouts are ready made and populated on the Training Peaks calendar and pushed to my Garmin, ready for me to just hit the start button and go. It's a really simple process and just makes following the plan really easy. Okay, so what has gone well in this training block? Well, probably the biggest change going into this plan was the level of the plan. So the 80-20 plans start from level 0 all the way up to level 3, and for this block, I felt like I was ready to take on a bit of a challenge, and I progressed to level 3. Now the main difference here is that you spend a lot more time running. You run every day for 21 days straight before having a rest day and repeat these 3-week blocks for the duration of that plan. And on top of that, you're also running twice a day, 2 times a week. Now I generally thought I'd probably have to throttle that back a bit, running that significant length of time and also twice a day, twice a week. I thought I'd see how it goes, but I'll probably have to roll that back and just cut out those second runs. But after the first couple of weeks, my body seemed to adjust to the load quite quickly. And with the exception of the week following my second 5-hour long run, where I pushed the pace on a fairly flat course, I haven't felt the need to deviate from the plan too much and miss those second runs. I also wasn't sure how much I'd enjoy the extra running and time on my feet, but I'm glad to say that with the exception of a handful of recovery runs, I've really enjoyed it and just enjoyed running. Especially when I look back across the past week and I take a look at the weekly mileage. Now, my old highest mileage week was around sort of 60 to 65 miles, and that's now become a kind of active rest week, and that's kind of at the low end of the mileage. And at the top end of the training block, I almost ran my first 100-mile training week. I got pretty close with 94 miles, which, I don't know, just felt pretty awesome. And I feel like it set me up well for whatever discipline I choose to train for next. At this point, I'm not quite sure. It might be the marathon distance again. It could be 5k, 10k, half marathon. I could go for any of those distances, really. I'll be interested in bringing my times down for those. But either way, I think I've built a good base here in this plan, and I'll be using the 80-20 level 3 plans again, definitely for whichever event I go for. So another highlight of this training block has been running my first ultra marathon. Now, ironically, I started this block to run my first ultra at the end of the training block, which I thought was going to be Race to the Stones, but I ended up running the 50k distance in a training run and then 35 miles in the longest training run on the plan. So technically, Race to the Stones will now be my third ultra, which is a bit weird. I became an ultra marathoner through the training block, but if you ever need something to pick you up when you're in the latter stages of a training block and it's getting pretty tough, an achievement like that will do the trick to keep you going. Something else I think has gone well is that I've managed to be pretty consistent through the training block. I think I've missed maybe 3-4 training sessions across the whole thing. Some of that was just out of my control, where life just gets in the way, and then, as I mentioned earlier, after the 35-miler, I needed a little more recovery time, so I took it a bit easier than planned the following week. But it worked really well. The little bit of calf and hamstring tightness I felt after that long run disappeared after a bit of stretching and rest, and I was able to get back fully into training the following week. Now, I do tend to be pretty consistent with the training plans, but my Brighton Marathon plan started in a less than ideal way just before Christmas last year. So it was good to start a block properly and stick with it over the many weeks of training. Now, as a result, I feel a lot more confident heading into this race than I did heading into Brighton. It's a little different as I've never run this distance before, whereas I had ran a marathon before. So I do feel like I'm heading into sort of unknown territory a bit here, but the training really couldn't have gone better. So I'm feeling confident enough to give it a go and just put everything out there on race day. I've got to say, I've also loved running in the spring and summer months. I definitely prefer training in warmer weather and running along the coast or through Devon countryside. That's just been absolutely awesome. Seeing the trails come to life with greens, pinks, purples, yellows and whites, and the butterflies doing their thing, as well as watching buzzards soaring on the thermals, has just been absolutely awesome. Now, I don't mind the winter months, but it's a lot easier to get out there when it's not freezing cold, chucking it down and blowing a hoolie out there. So that pretty much covers what's gone well and what I've enjoyed. I feel like a stronger, fitter runner. I feel like I can maintain that kind of zone 1, zone 2 pace for hopefully the whole 100k. I think the training has put me in a good place to achieve my goals and just, give it everything on race day. But it hasn't been all sunshine and rainbows, so here's a couple of things that haven't gone so well, or things I'd do differently next time. So first up, the timing of the race in terms of the training block and where it sat in relation to my last race wasn't ideal. So I trained for Brighton Marathon, which took place in early April, took a couple of rest weeks and then started the ultra training block. Not ideal, as I'd prefer at least another week or two just kind of ticking along, letting the recovery settle in before starting a new block. But also with the training block being so long, I think it's around 18 weeks, I think I started the block at around week 3 or 4. So again, ideally I'd have that little more time to rest and then start the block properly from week 1. I wasn't too worried about missing the early weeks of the plan because with the step up in level, I was at the level 2 marathon plan for the 80-20, and now this is the level 3 plan. So there was quite a bit of crossover between the sort of tail end of my last plan and the start of this one. But it's not the ideal way to go about it, but there's not much I could do about it. For next year's race calendar, I'm going to properly kind of sit down and think about the races and events I really want to do, and then try to plot them out on a calendar with a little bit more thought, and kind of build in that recovery time just to make sure that everything's spaced out well. It's going to give me enough time to recover and hit the next block even better than I did this one. Now, something else I would change next time is to mix up the zone 2 running a bit more. I made a point of keeping most of my zone 2 runs, which make up about 80% of the training, in the low end of my zone 2 range, so around 148 to 155 beats per minute, which is around where I'll be on race day, just maybe a touch lower. And partly why I was keeping it so low is just to get used to that pace and being disciplined to keep that heart rate down. But after my 35-mile run, I had an extremely tight hamstring and calf, and I think this was largely due to the kind of repetitive nature of staying in that zone on a fairly flat course, and it kind of created that kind of repetitive strain. And it made me think just how much of my running over this block has been at that heart rate and that pace. So whilst recovering from that 35-miler, I found it actually loosened up and recovered quicker if I pushed a higher pace towards the top end of my zone 2. So I think alternating zone 2 runs with sort of low end efforts and high end efforts, or even within the run itself, sort of throw in a harder effort still, keeping it in zone 2, just not always at the low end, and that will help to avoid any repetitive strain issues. Next up, and I reckon a few of you out there might be able to relate to this one, and I've been wanting to change this for some time, and I tend to start out with good intentions, and then as the weeks go by it ends up falling by the wayside, and it's strength training, or rather lack of strength training. Now, I was doing 2 to 3 sessions right at the beginning of the block, which then kind of went down to about 1 session mid-block, and now it's completely fallen by the wayside. It's frustrating as I know it's going to take my running to the next level, but I find it so hard to get excited about strength work. I'm going to try and find a local gym and hope that having the space to work out and a kind of wider array of equipment might do the trick for the next block. It's something I've been saying I need to do for a while now, and I just need to start putting the kind of the good thoughts and intentions into action and sticking with it long enough for it to become part of the weekly training routine. I'd also change how frequently I practice race day nutrition and hydration, and I realised that I could have been practicing this in my shorter long runs of around 90 minutes or so, but I was so used to not using anything on anything less than a half marathon that I stuck to my old training habits. I think I've had enough practice on the longer runs with nutrition, hydration, that kind of thing, but I don't feel I've got it quite dialed in enough yet, and it's kind of one of the most important things for an ultra that you've got to get that nutrition right. You've got to be constantly kind of drinking and eating, and I think I just could have done a bit better there to get used to basically always eating whilst on the run. I think it's going to be okay. I've got a kind of plan mapped out, and I'll talk this through a bit more in Friday's video when I go through my race plan, talk you through the gear I'll be using and the paces that I'm hoping to go at. But I think, this is definitely an area that I'm going to need to work on in the future when tackling other ultra races. Now finally, and I wouldn't necessarily say this hasn't gone well, but I have found that one of the hardest parts of this plan is the recovery runs, and it was new and novel at first to be running twice a day, but fitting them in presents its kind of own challenge, and the very easy, gentle pace, which whilst lovely to begin with, gets quite monotonous after a little while. Now, it didn't help that the only stretch of flattish course nearby is a kind of 2-mile loop, which I do twice in a recovery run. So for the next plan, I might rethink how I tackle those, and I just make sure that I'm just mixing up the route a little more to keep them fresh and just a little bit more exciting. Now that's about it for the things that haven't gone well and things I'd change, and overall I'm pretty happy with how the block has gone. I've achieved things that have been on my goals list for, pretty much ever since I started running, as well as achieving a consistent training block, and at the end of the day, you can't argue with that. I'm really looking forward to race day. I can't wait to get on the start line and just soak up that atmosphere of the day. I still think it's a crazy distance. It's just going to be crazy being running for God knows how long, 8, 9, 10, 11 hours. I'm nervous about it. I think the time that I'm going to be out there running for is just bonkers, but I know I won't be alone, and from what I've heard, they are one of the best supported kind of ultras out there. Now, Friday's video, like I said, is going to be about my race day prep, nutrition strategy for the day, and everything that I'm sort of thinking about to prepare for the race, the gear I'm running in, and then it will be race day. It's almost here. I better get packing. Right, thanks for watching, and until the next one, be the best you.